Hello and welcome to today's show, where my audio is slightly worse than usual because I'm at my brother's house, looking after his cats. I'm going to be reviewing the Cosmic Skeptic Jordan Peterson conversation. I've just come out of the shower from going to the gym, going to my friend's birthday in a bit as well, so this won't be super long. And I'm cramming some food in between. I also put it back an hour because there were some Christians between here and the gym, and I spent an hour talking to them, doing evangelism. Yes, the thumbnail is Little Britain. The quote, yeah, but no, but yeah, but no. So good spot. 500 Nathan Nichols for you. Lola, if that is your real name, 250 Nathan Nichols for you. And Casper Pavinsky, 100 Nathan Nichols. Mind Onion, do better next time. So I'm going to be like some kind of disgusting Peter Boghossian Canadian Catholic crossover, if you can imagine such a thing, and eat food on stream. Maybe I'll turn my camera off if I'm too much of a pig. And let me find the actual thingy as well. Jordan Peterson. There it is. Share screen, Arc tab, this one, share. Hopefully.
Hello, everyone.
Hopefully you can hear.
And
let's just
in the early church,
don't care about coming up. Don't care.
There was a debate.
Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming here. It's a long way from London. We're in LA, and so that's a long ways. And so,
oh yeah, something to comment on here as well is like mad expensive to fly him out to LA to do this. I don't know how much. 390k video. Maybe it's actually worth it. Not some.
And insofar as you're going to disagree with me, I'm pleased that you're exhausted from the flight because that'll slow you down and that'll be helpful. So anyways, seriously, thank you for coming.
Of course.
So let's start with this, Cosmic Skeptic. Right, okay, so how do you come up with the name and why the conjunction, and what do you think the advantages, if any, in relationship to the emphasis on skepticism?
I'll give you the official and the unofficial story. The official story is that cosmic sort of implies universe, space.
I just realized Arc browser does this annoying thing. And yeah, let me just check people can actually hear it as well. And change my layout. I don't want this layout. It doesn't look as good. That layout. What's going on there? What the fuck is going on, bro? Okay. And then I'll bring them like this. Will I? Is that what I'm going to do? No, I don't know if I like that. Should I bring myself central like this? Yeah, the picture so what that is I use this cool browser called Arc that I actually quite like. But it has this feature that when you click off a tab, the video pops out in a little window so you can keep watching it, which is why then when I click back to StreamYard, the video goes out. So I'm going to just need to stay on it. And where the hell did the actual tab go? So here, yeah, let's play.
Big thinking. And Skeptic sort of situates me within a tradition of people who are interested in interrogating their beliefs to their sort of fundamental grounding insofar as that's possible. And Skeptic is spelled with a K because most of my listeners are American. The unofficial answer is that when I was younger, I knew a guy who was a musician and started a SoundCloud account with the word cosmic in it. And I thought, hey, that sounds like a cool word. And I was starting a YouTube channel and wanted something that sounded cool. And I thought Skeptic sounded cool next to it. And I spelled it with a K because I got it wrong.
I see. Okay. Well, who knows the actual derivation? And it's a good combination though, because it's catchy. So that's nice from a marketing side. But it also has this, it's an interesting allusion to the combination of revelation and critical thinking that actually makes up actual thinking, right? Because
I do think it's a weird response to say who knows the actual derivation, because he does. He just gave you the actual derivation, right? But yeah.
The problem with being concerned with a vast plethora of ideas is that many ideas are misleading and wrong. And so you have to learn how to combine that openness and curiosity with the capacity to separate the wheat from the chaff. Yeah. And that's the utility of skepticism. I mean, it can degenerate into a kind of argumentative nihilism. That's the downside. But properly applied, it separates the wheat from the chaff, right? And the purpose of that is to keep the wheat.
Well, skepticism can only ever be essentially destructive because you're being skeptical of something. Somebody's putting something.
So I agree with what Jordan said here so far. I do think that skepticism should be not, rather than viewed as a sort of personality or an identity or something, one particular sort of feature that comes of our reasoning or thinking that comes with a whole bunch of tools that we can apply to think about things. Alex is about to make a claim that I think I disagree with, though. So let me just let him finish that before I come in.
Putting something forward and you're sort of responding to that with skepticism. And so for a lot of people, if skepticism is the thing that you do, then you sort of end up chipping away and ending up with nothing. Whereas skepticism is really supposed to be a tool that you use. It is destructive, but in the way that you might sort of carve a piece of marble.
Yeah, right.
You're intending to get.
So I think there's a sense in which skepticism can be considered purely destructive. So maybe this is just all that Alex means by it. However, I do think that overall skepticism can actually be considered tools that are constructive as well, because basically what they do is they test for things like maybe consistency or parsimony in models, or they encourage us to do things like compare models and build better models. And so I think that skepticism can be constructive in the sense that when it's applied well in the right sort of way, it will lead to the building of better, more refined theories, right? And I've heard Alex use the word reflective equilibrium here and there, and I think that skepticism is a part of that reflective equilibrium. If you don't apply skepticism to the beliefs that you hold, then you end up not reflecting or modifying them in a good way. You might modify them in a way that simply, bolsters them or collects some more arguments. So you've got, you go a little bit deeper on a dialogue tree or something. But supposing you apply skepticism well, that will do that.
To get a statue out of it.
Yes. Well, that's the thing to always keep in mind, is skepticism in the service of something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a tool. It's a methodological tool. It's not a world.
You mentioned too, and so I'm interested in your progression in your thinking in relationship to that, because you mentioned just before we actually went on air that had you come to see me a couple of years ago, you might have been more inclined to, I'm putting words in your mouth to some degree, so correct me if I'm wrong, to strive for a victory or to make your point, something like that. And you alluded to the fact that your thinking around that has changed to some degree. I suspect that's probably a consequence of experience. So what's changed?
In part, it might have something to do with becoming a podcaster and speaking weekly to people. And you can't keep up that energy. Well, you can, but it becomes totally unwatchable. And nobody wants to.
Okay, so this is a point I really did want to comment on. So I think Alex, as compared to many of the people that I'm critical of, I think Alex is very self-aware and intelligent. And so this is a good observation that he's making. However, I think he should take it further, which is what I'll say in a second. So I've just changed the speed just to focus in on this. So let's...
Consequence of experience. So what's changed?
In part, it might have something to do with becoming a podcaster and speaking.
Right. So in part, it may have something to do with becoming a podcaster. Now, I often talk about the way that interrogating biases, social dynamics, and so on is very important for us when it comes to us assessing the types of beliefs that we form, because I think that psychological data show that these types of things have way more of an influence over our beliefs that we come to hold and report, more so than the types of reasons that we would say that we provide, right? And so in this case, this is Alex's full-time career, making videos and podcasting. And so that in order to have guests on that, particularly in this kind of circle where many of the guests are sort of like performative intellectuals, and many are quite sort of thin-skinned and a little bit narcissistic, you kind of need to not provide so much pushback that they'd be likely to not come on your show, to not want to engage, and so on. Now, Alex, the justification that Alex gives, of course, is slightly different from this. He says it's because it wouldn't make for good watching if he did that. No, I don't think that's right. I think that a lot of people find it very entertaining, and I think that even this interview, part of the reason that it's so popular with people is because people want to see Jordan Peterson finally have his feet held to the fire over this particular issue of him not being clear and precise. They want someone to really hold him accountable for his beliefs and make him be clear about them for once, right? And so even though Alex is kind of like pulling his shots quite a lot throughout, I think, and I still want to praise him for doing a good job of going in there and not just completely softballing him, but giving difficult questions, which I've seen him do on a few of these shows. I also think he could have realistically gone further with some of that pushback too. And my the belief I form, and you don't have to form this, and Alex may even disagree, is that the reason that he's doing that is because he's sort of thinking long term. He doesn't want to alienate these potential guests in future. So there's a sort of aspect of sucking up that has to go on, and of not, even the criticism that he delivers, he does it in quite a smart way, where Peterson almost doesn't realize that he's kind of being made fun of, sort of. But we'll get to that as we go on.
Speaking weekly to people, and you can't keep up that energy. Or you can, but it becomes totally unwatchable, and nobody wants to engage in that all the time. I think there are times when it's worth doing, and to be clear, I still like to disagree and do so essentially unapologetically and bluntly, and that can still come across as quite rude. But I think that the way that I would think about a conversation is that, well, what are we about to do here? A debate. We're about to debate an issue, and I'm going to try to win, and that's. And not even, I mean, maybe there's sort of an element of pride in there. You want to win for that sake, but also you really think, well, I want to win because I think I'm right about this. And if I don't, then, I must have just not expressed myself properly. I think what I probably meant when I was saying that is that I would have had more of that cap on than now, after having so many conversations with so many people and realizing that not only is it more constructive for myself, I've learned a lot more. Now I'm here like, hey, I might learn something today. That would be great. Even if I just learn something about what you're...
To provide pushback on my own point of view, though, I think there's something to what he's saying here too, that you can learn more by being less confrontational, combative. However, I would temper that claim with, I think when it comes to, say, someone like Peterson, for example, what he believes is so systematically and radically in error, and he jumps through so many hoops to rationalize all of these various positions, that I think it is worth not engaging in the kind of civility porn with him, of just talking about how much you love having the disagreements, but actually having those disagreements, because I don't think it happens with competent people, and I want to see it happen so badly. I want a competent person to come in and just show blitz, not quite blitz, but rigorously and thoroughly show what's systematically wrong with all of these things Peterson believes, from the way he handles and interprets psychological studies, to the political inferences he makes, to his interpretations of religion, to how he ties these things back to psychology, to his views of philosophy, to his interpretations of philosophers that are historically wrong, to the types of claims that he makes about the sciences, like climate change. He's wrong about all of these things in radical ways, and it all comes from having bad epistemology, and from the various sort of like dynamics of audience capture and maligned incentives, like being paid by the Daily Wire and so on. So I think there's something to what Alex is saying. Of course, we can learn more, but I mean, I want Alex to say, well, Alex, specifically, what is it you think you're actually going to learn? Like, for example, think of Peterson's sort of specializations. Is it knowledge of Jung that you lack, and you think that, maybe there's something that you're missing about Jung? No, I would hazard a guess that the reason you're really going on there is because Peterson's got a really big profile. You think he's wrong about some things, and it's because you think you can bring some clarity as an interviewer that other people haven't brought on, rather than it being, in this case, to learn, right? And so I think they're sort of combative. You don't want a combative stance. You want to keep people's biases low, but you want to actually really challenge them, right? And I think that can be achieved.
Your worldview is, but also people listening just unanimously say that they prefer it. It's a much...
Well, the skepticism. So one of the things you learn as a therapist, for example, is that being right is not very helpful, especially when you're trying to help someone, because whether you as the therapist is right has very little to do with the positive outcome for them. You still want to maintain the skepticism. And one of the ways of doing that in the manner that's helpful is that, like, if I'm talking to you and you say something I don't understand, that's the right place to be skeptical, because if I don't understand what you said, well, it might be my ignorance, but it also might be like lack of clarity and pointedness on your part. And so one of the advantages of disagreeing
I agree with what Peterson's saying right here.
With someone is to point out to them in a positive way where they're lost in the fog. Because if you're sufficiently lost in the fog, you tend to run into sharp objects, and that's not very pleasant. So, but the skepticism,
I think, though, the conclusion, tying it back to relevance that Peterson makes there, he could be sort of overstating the case. I mean, he makes it sound like something profound has been kind of achieved there, but all he's saying is that, like, you need to believe true things in order to go about achieving your goals accurately, right? Because if you have false beliefs, then, well, I sort of think that what it means for something to be true or false is kind of conditioned on it being successful for what you're trying to achieve. But given other views as well, and trying to sort of incorporate and be tolerant towards those, I think that this is sort of a quite obvious truism. It's not like it. Most people would sort of think that true has something to do with that. They wouldn't need to be persuaded as the upshot of these reasons. Like, oh, I just thought about skepticism and I realized the upshot of skepticism is this really useful thing. No, they're probably like on board with the useful thing, and then you persuade them of skepticism from that.
skepticism, and this is obviously what you alluded to, I would say, as a consequence of learning from the podcast, is the skepticism should be in service of rectifying your ignorance rather than in service of making your point or winning the argument. Problem with winning a bloody argument is—
Okay, so here, notice how Peterson's framed that. He's framed it as though they're mutually exclusive enterprises. And I talk like this, and I realize that not all my audience will think or talk like this. All I mean, mutually exclusive, I just mean that like either of them would be the case without any overlap in between, right? And so when he's saying, being skeptical, let me get exactly what he said, right?
So, but the skepticism, and this is obviously what you alluded to, I would say, as a consequence of learning from the podcast, is the skepticism should be in service of rectifying your ignorance rather than in service of making your point or winning the argument. Problem with winning a—
Maybe I would modify exactly how I'm phrasing my interpretation. Yeah, improving your beliefs or winning an argument. That's the dichotomy that he's creating, right? And I don't think that is a true dichotomy. I think that you can win an argument or resolve a disagreement, clearly showing there's something wrong with your opponent's point of view and that your view is the superior one. And at the same time, improve your own views, because maybe they showed that there are some tensions that you've not thought about, or maybe they showed this thing that you haven't thought about, this response, or maybe there was something that they said that you responded to on the spot, but you learned something new because you hadn't thought of this before, and it's improved your view. So, for example, I had a debate a while ago with like a parapsychologist where I was sort of framed as the skeptic who was talking to this parapsychologist. And I think that even though I went about it in where I wanted to win the debate, I think it helped improve my views because I've read a lot of the psychological literature around parapsychology and psychology of the supernatural, like Chris French's book. And I interviewed Chris French, and these were all things that I only did in service of winning the debate, right? And it was both in service of winning the debate and improving my views.
A bloody argument.
So I get the point that debate can be performative too.
Is that the victory can seduce you into thinking that you were correct, and you're never sufficiently correct, right?
Yes.
And so I don't like debates fundamentally. I've never really enjoyed them. I probably, when I was really young, before I stopped doing this when I was about 23.
By the way, if I'm fiddling around, I need to charge my phone as well, because I'm going to need to rush off at the end of this to go to my friend's birthday. So I need to make sure I have phone charge.
A certain amount of pleasure in being able to obtain intellectual victory. It was also a way I defended myself when I was young, and it was effective. But it's not the optimal way to conduct a conversation. This is one of the reasons why people like Rogan are so successful, because Joel pushes point, but he always does it in the service of learning.
Yes.
He doesn't do it in the service of victory.
Yeah. I think you've probably put your finger on it there. But what you were saying a moment ago about precision, about sort of thinking clearly and understanding somebody else clearly. I think the reason why I'm excited to speak to you today is because you're someone who celebrates being precise in your speech. And I've always appreciated your desire to make sure that you're really understanding what somebody else is saying. I've made attempts in the past to, I mean, my channel is mostly focused on the philosophy of religion.
Yes.
And I've made attempts in the past to try to understand your worldviews.
Yeah,
your
I watched
religious
some of
worldview.
them.
And I made a video essay.
Yeah.
And some of the things I said there, I think, at least one thing in particular, I probably think I was wrong about. But what I was trying to do there, I've seen that people would ask you on interviews and podcasts, you know, do you believe in God? Do you think that Christianity is true? And it was sort of, you would sort of struggle to answer the question. And I thought to myself, well,
people come at the question with a priori commitments about what they think truth constitutes.
Yeah,
that's a big problem.
There must be something important that's being left out of the sort of precondition of that question or conversation. If it's so unimaginably difficult to answer, you know.
Well, I'll give you an example. I watched that essay this morning, right? And I also wanted to talk to you about your discussion with Dawkins.
Yeah.
So people ask me, for example, do you believe in God? And I think, well, I don't know what you are driving at with that question, because I don't know what you mean by belief.
Yeah, well, what I mean by believe is, do you tend to say that statement is true, or do you tend to say that statement is false? When I say in God, I would say that a being of some sort who is the creator of the world and worthy of worship exists. Now, maybe that being, you know, you might think that they're much more powerful than us, or you might think they're a disembodied mind. You might think that they're perfect in some sense, or that they ground morality or have something to do with morality, that they have purposes for humankind, that you might think they've interacted with some of the major world religions in some way. But typically, you know, this is what I understand by God. Take your pick of any of these cluster of things. So it's not nothing, it's not anything goes, but it's quite a lot of things go. And by belief, I'm just asking you, true, false, don't know.
Believe. Most people, modern
you've got a form in front of you, and there's the statement, God exists. Is that true? Is that false? Strongly agree, strongly disagree, or unsure?
People believe that a belief is a description of accordance with a set of facts.
Sure.
Right. Well, I don't think that's what belief means in the religious sense in the least. So I just think that's a non-starter.
It has something to do with what you act out, right?
It has to do with what you believe is what you're willing to die for. Fundamentally, is what you're committed.
In my mind, I would die for what I believe, but one of the mind's greatest powers is how it deceives. Akala. Tell you people dialogue and your beliefs, that's just dialogue. Akala's a Christian, I think, as well. Yeah, I don't think that this is right. What you believe is what you would die for, right? Like I obviously believe that there's a cup in front of me that I'm doing a stream. Would I die for doing it? You know, if someone held a gun to my head and say that change your mind, or I'll shoot you, well, I'd probably change my mind. Does that mean I don't believe it? No. I think this is a kind of bizarre rhetorical take. I think there's some kind of weird gerrymandering of language going on here for the purposes of muddying the waters and hiding in them, so as not to make not to answer a straightforward question, which he very well knows what it means.
Committed to or live for, if you think about it as life in the most extensive manner. It's a matter of commitment.
Well, it's life in the most extensive manner. Like, that's gibberish.
But I understand what you mean in the religious context.
Yeah.
So, but religion is a big topic. Religion is a
like, this is like trying to nail Jello to a wall. Like, it's like,
it's a mighty, area to be talking about. But when I talk about belief in a more mundane sense, like I believe that this chair exists.
Yeah.
Like, that is a belief that I hold. I sort of can't help.
Very
but
well.
yes,
Very good.
Well, that's a place where your action and your statements align.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is
you
why,
believe in the chair and you're sitting in it. It's like, fair enough.
Which is why I totally agree when you say that what you believe might really be what you act out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when people are looking for essentially definitions, and just a second ago you said, well, what is it to believe? And you said, well, what you believe is what you're willing to die for.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists.
Maybe
in a broad sense. If not believing that the chair existed required.
Hard to say. It's not hard to say.
me to sort of give up my trust in my sense data,
Right.
then I might literally die by accident by sort of walking off a cliff because I don't trust my eyes anymore. So it's
Well, it's
purely
also
that
not
sense.
something that you're likely to forego given your role, let's say, as a rational skeptic.
That's right.
Seriously, like it's
No, he might. Why wouldn't he? Ban of veganism. Sorry, Alex, if you're watching. But like, people. I wouldn't hold it against someone if they were being threatened with death to change their mind about something.
commitment that you've made to a certain view of reality.
But you understand surely that when somebody asks, do you
Who would die for skepticism? It's just very bizarre.
believe in God? Although there are
I mean, maybe I'd die for political. Maybe I think I'd die for political rights.
asking the sort of subject of the belief
Yeah.
is a much more grand entity. The word belief itself, for them, at least in their question, even if you think it's an appropriate question, they mean something much more mundane. They mean like you believe in the existence
it's
of a
hard to
chair.
know. It's hard to know what people mean. Like one of the things I've noticed, for example, is there are no shortage of Christian trolls, right? I mean, there are atheist trolls and there's engineering trolls. There's lots of trolls, but there are Christian trolls. And the Christian trolls, when they ask that question, and it's often the Christian trolls who ask that question, what they mean is, are you in my club?
Exactly.
Right. And my answer is, I'm not even sure you know what club you're in. So there's a trap in the question, which I don't appreciate because I don't like questions that have traps in them.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a little bit sympathetic to Peterson's point of view here.
Now, not everybody who's asking that question has a trap, but many people do, and so I find that off-putting. Let's say because
as in what they're really asking is, are you in the in group or the out group? However, I think that even identifying that doesn't delegitimize that there is a straightforward sense in which the question could be, one's answering of the question could be viewed as the conditions for in-group or out-group membership. And so whether or not they care if you're in or out of the group, right, they still want you to give an answer to the first order question. The first order question doesn't sort of disappear or something.
Because it's manipulative. In terms of that descriptive belief, that's something we could go into. I think we should do that because it does get to the core of the matter that you were attempting to untangle, let's say, in your essay.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of and I had to sort of piece together different things you'd said in different interviews. And I suppose the reason I had to do that was because I didn't have you in front of me. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity now. It seems to me that when you speak of God, you mean something like that which is at the, I don't know if you'd rather say the basis or the top. The basis or the top.
Both metaphors.
Of a value hierarchy. And it begins with the recognition that any...
At least he's not saying, interior intimo mio, superior sumo mio, or whatever. The little fucking... You've got to be deep in the lore to come out with that one. Let's see what's going on off in the chat. What's going off in the chat? Jordan suits piss everyone off. Joe pushes a point. Yeah, the Joe Rogan stuff, podcasting. Aaron Ross said you would die professing weak atheism. That's kind of funny to me. I sort my hair out as well. Glad I came back. Oh, gotta not look like a shit. Oh, it's too late. You are what you eat, and now look at that. What the fuck is that? Every single time, man, I can't get my hair sorted. Also, front double bicep. So looking forward to reviews of this talk. I thought Alex did incredibly well, and it seemed like JP contradicted himself many times. He also got broken brain at the broken brain at the end, so I might have to skip through a little bit. Maybe, or I could do part 1, part 2 if I run out of time. Just come clean and admit that you owe 690,000 Nathan Nichols. I'm not sure this. I show the interview. It was shit. I think you mean saw. More bicep porn, less civility porn. Okay, views are going up. The more that I show the biceps. Oh no, I lost one viewer. I got to flex harder. Flex harder. I'm the whitest guy in the world. Okay, let's go back.
anything that anybody does requires some kind of value. Even just to do something as simple as sitting in a chair or picking up a glass.
Well, you don't
requires
do
value.
anything without it being oriented towards a value.
Exactly, right. And so even to perceive the glass is something you've spoken about before. Why do I see the glass as one object, even though it's got multiple parts? It's got a side and bottom and top. I see them.
I actually think there's something kind of off here about this analysis of why do I see the glass. I think when we're talking about motivation, right, that motivations in terms of actions are guided by values. So because there's some goal that motivates you to action. But when we talk about something like sensory perception and the way that the way that we perceive the world, I sort of think that this is more driven, the type of explanations that I think are appropriate here are going to be ones that sort of link together physics and biology and neuroscience and tell me about the architecture of the eye and the brain and different like cognitive modules in the brain responsible for processing vision and a story about like wavelengths, some kind of understanding of how that works and then gets translated. And maybe we need to bring a little bit of an understanding of like information theory in to understand how it's the same information that is the information for what the object's being perceived, and that is sort of represented in a particular kind of way by a system in the brain. And maybe there's a sense, I don't think that the way that our visual system or our sensory systems work is dependent upon our values. I think it's more just dependent upon our biological architecture. However, that being said, what we focus our attention on is driven by our values, right? So I might, I might not focus on aspects of my vision. I might not focus on certain noises. I'm trying to pick, if there's a lot of kind of ambient noise of traffic around, I'm trying to pick out and focus on the human voices or something. And so there's a sort of notion of direct control over attention to some degree, though obviously that's not completely true because there's things like attention deficit disorder, which are not due to lack of play in childhood, as Peterson asserts. It's complicated, but the point that I'm making is this whole sort of point about perceiving the glass. I think Peterson's story here, and it's a story that Alex seems to be sympathetic to, or maybe he's just saying it to build rapport with Peterson. I don't really know. I think it's mistaken, and it's not as clear as it could be in disambiguating between different things like motivations to act versus perception. And how
them
that
together
works.
in a way that I don't see the cup and the table as one object. Well, you said before, it's because I can grip it. It's sort of functional. It's because I can use this cup. And the reason that I see it in that way is because I can then drink from it. And the reason that I want to do that is because I sort of value my health. And there's sort of a value regress that goes on.
Always.
And more broadly, this comes out in the question of like, why you're writing an essay to get a good grade, or why do you want a good grade to get a good job? Why do you want a good job to get money? And you keep going back and back.
God.
It has to terminate somewhere.
That's right.
Because otherwise there would be nothing to sort of lend that value.
Well, otherwise you'd always be in an infinite regress.
Further down,
right? You just die.
I mean, if you truly were in an infinite regress, then it would still work, right? If there were some kind of circular justification, it would work. Or if it terminated in multiple different places, and even if those places were arbitrary, those terminating points of values. If you suppose you had 100,000 arbitrary terminating values, that would also work as a model. So it's not going to have to be God.
I am
Or
questioning.
yeah, you literally, it's the kind of regress in which the value that you have for A actually borrows the value from B. You don't value A at all without B. So it doesn't get it without B, and B doesn't get it without C, and C doesn't get it without D. So if that went on infinitely, there's nothing to give the entire sequence value in the first place.
Right.
So
no, this is exactly like the sort of Kalam reasoning, right? If that went on infinitely, there wouldn't be a first element that would propagate through the sequence, giving each value its value. However, right, what there would be is for every element, there would be an element before it which gives it its value. So every element, because what's required for every element to because what's required for every element to have its value is that there's an element before it giving it its value. Well, how is that satisfied in an infinite sequence? Well, because every single element in the sequence has a value before it. What you're doing is you're saying an infinite sequence with a starting point, right? There wouldn't be a first one. And it's like, yeah, because X hypothesis, there is X hypothesis, there isn't a first item, but that's not a problem because all we need is that every element has an element before it. Now, I'm not saying that I actually think that there is an infinite sequence of values, right? I've got no idea how our values are related to one another. Maybe there's something intuitive about what Peterson's saying. I have no idea if it's the correct view of well, I think it's wrong for various reasons, but I don't think that this justification is good for believing it.
So there's got to be something in the basis here. And then you said, at least on one occasion, that we'll call that place, whatever's at the top there, we'll call it the divine place.
Yeah,
and you said we'll make that
that's a matter of definition. Yeah, yeah.
Now, I'm fine with this.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that what you're doing is you're giving a definition of God that makes him,
partial definition,
or makes it him, whatever, unavoidably exist, and also makes it a quite different entity to the entity described by a great deal of, for instance, your Christian listeners, who will say that God is not the basis of a value hierarchy. God is an omnipotent, omniscient, agential being with consciousness that intentionally brings about human beings and sent down a physical man to sacrifice his life in order to save us from our sins. Now, that means that when someone asks you, does God exist? And you say, well, look, I think that's almost an inappropriate question. At times you sort of imply that you don't even believe in atheists because you sort of act as if you believe in God. If what you mean by God is just...
Well, Dawkins himself admitted he was a cultural Christian.
That's another matter, because that's much more specific. I mean, that's cultural Christianity, right? This is just... Although
but it's a reflection of the same problem.
But you know, when a Christian says to you, I mean very clear that that's what I mean by God. I don't know if you do believe in the omniscient, omnipotent, agential being, but if you start talking about the inevitability of believing in some basis of a value hierarchy...
Well, it's not so obvious.
It's not so
obvious from the traditional Judeo-Christian perspective that God is properly conceptualized as a being.
That's probably right.
Well, so it's tricky, right? Because one of the ways that you can approach God traditionally is in relationship to a being, but that's a veil. So why do I say that? Okay, so let's speak about it religiously first, then we can speak about it conceptually.
Who's a guy, Martin Buber, the I and thou thing, right? I don't know if my suspicion is that Peterson's kind of come across this idea third hand through the types of people he's surrounded by on the Exodus talks on Daily Wire that he's doing. And so he's probably heard, or maybe even Robert Barron saying something like, you know, God is not a being amongst beings, but God is the ground of being itself, or something, you know. But I think the clearest analysis of this point that can be made in a plausible way is given by a German theologian, I think, called Martin Buber, where he sort of provides a psychological analysis of different types of relationships that people have to things and persons. But I'm not going to recall it. I'm not going to recall it very well because this is quite a while ago that I've thought about it. I've not thought about it much since. But it's something to the effect of that you don't sort of relate to you relate to persons in a fundamentally different sort of way than the way that you relate to beings or entities. And so if God exists as a person, or, you know, a personal agent or whatever, then the way that you relate to them is in this like interpersonal way rather than as one relates to like an item or an object. I think that's the strongest way you can kind of go with this. But I think there's a way of going with this that basically ends up just being like kind of pseudo-profound wiffle waffle. Like, well, God's not a being, so my theory now just became even more flexible and amorphous, and you can't pin me down because I won't say anything, sort of thing.
So there's a tremendous insistence in the Judeo-Christian tradition that God is outside of the categorical structure, right? Like seriously outside. Elijah, the prophet, establishes that God is not in nature. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the conflagration. He's not in the storm, right? So that doesn't mean that nature doesn't speak of God, but it does mean that whatever God is not in the natural world. Okay, now we can extend that. Not bound by time.
I didn't listen to the
prophet establishes that God is not in nature. He's not in the earthquake. He's not in the conflagration. He's not in the storm, right? So
what do you mean he's not in the... I mean, firstly, in the Old Testament, they sort of did think he was thought he was a cloud following them around when they were carrying the like. It's only there are different models of God, and at least at those early points in the Old Testament, the different model of God was that God was physical or a cloud that followed them around, kind of thing. The pneuma, the breath, is a very different thought world.
That doesn't mean that nature doesn't speak of God, but it does mean that whatever God is not in the natural world. Okay, now we can extend that. Not bound by time, not bound by space. Well, does that make God a material object? Because when people say, is God real, which is a variant of the question, do you believe in God? It's like, well, God's immaterial and outside of time and space. So if your definition of real is material things in the domain of time and space, then we're not talking about the same thing. Now, usually people approach that question of belief with some...
Yeah, but they're not asking, they're not saying to you, Jordan, do I believe in God? They're asking you, do you believe in God?
Materialistic frame.
It's like people ask me the question, do you believe in those cats on the sofa? Look, there's those cats on the sofa. They don't even know that they are in a YouTube video. And people ask me the question, do you believe there are cats on the sofa? And I respond, well, you don't believe in cats. And it's like, what? No, I'm asking you if you believe in that. What the fuck? Like, it's such astonishingly mind-bending unclarity.
Framework like that in mind, even if they don't know it.
Yes.
The Christians, let's say, who put this question forward in the hope of getting the answer they want to hear, are materialistic and Enlightenment minds, even though they don't know it, because they have an implicit definition of what constitutes real. Is God real? It's like, no, God's hyper real. That's not the same thing.
No, I just do not think that's right, because these sorts of Christians who are asking that question will typically grant that non-physical things like souls or angels or demons or objective moral facts or something exist too, without them being grounded in the physical. So this just seems like a bizarre sort of accusation to levy against those people in order to not, again, avoid just answering what is quite a straightforward question.
I think that the physicality of God is an interesting question.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament tradition, it seems to evolve as far as I can see. If you look at some of the earlier descriptions of God, you've got a God who walks through the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
You've got a God who has a council of angels and the accuser. You have a sort of, it's being at least conceptualized as a much more physical being. And as time goes on, God becomes less localized. And I've heard a lot of theories as to why that's the case. I've just done an episode on my own show.
I'm not sure that's true. Exactly. I don't think there's a clear historical progression like that. There is a constant tension between God as ineffable and then God as manifest.
Christine Hayes certainly views it this way in her Old Testament series, which I highly recommend, with Yale. Much better than the PragerU, not Daily Wire with Dennis Prager series done by Jordan on the Old Testament. She describes how it's around the theory that she offers is that it was during a time where the Babylonians came and took over all the political power and stuff, and in order to kind of preserve their culture and understand why the physical God wasn't sort of with them, fighting for them, defending the religious objects, they kind of psychologized God and modified the theology such that God kind of was there but not there, kind of thing.
Manifest in a manner that's comprehensible, right? And
additionally, I think that is a far better explanation alongside good hermeneutics for interpreting the Old Testament. I think that in order to interpret what's being said in the Bible in the way that Jordan wants us to, when we get into the details, we're going to have to make so many weird assumptions about why people were saying what they were saying if they believed this in an ancient Near Eastern context with other things that they believed at the time as well. Like, why did they phrase things like that? Why did they omit that? It's going to get kind of very, very costly.
So Mircea Eliade mapped the consequences of this out to some degree. So he was very interested in Nietzsche's proposition that God had died. Most people, including Nietzsche, regarded...
I mean, again, Mircea Eliade 100 years ago plus, and, not exactly using the best methodologies from contemporary social sciences or from historical studies, far more archaeological findings and understandings of these cultures that Eliade is trying to understand and explain. You know, like the analysis that Eliade gives, he creates like entities that he calls like hierarchies or whatever, and he provides an analysis of religion wherein there's like geographical features of religions that map to human psychological universals, which would be very difficult to hold to today, because there are counterexamples to those with the more additional information that we have about religions in non-Western Judeo-Christian cultures, right? Eliade is really mostly focused on Islam and Christianity and Judaism. So I don't think... I think, again, it sort of undermines some of Peterson's case, the amount of emphasis that he puts on Eliade's work. And Eliade, of course, for those of you who, like me, disagree with Peterson's views, I'm pretty sure Eliade was also a fascist and justified and supported fascism at the time, and used some of those. So this is obviously, of course, just ad hominem, but it's interesting how I would say, you know, this kind of view of reality that is grounded in a particular type of psychologized religious thinking, then connected to this type of politics that embeds a kind of natural order and motivates one to want to do horrible things. So let's continue.
Regarded that as like a unique historical event. There was a religious tradition, the Enlightenment arose, in consequence, we became skeptical about God, and in 1850, the philosophers decided that he was no longer necessary or real. But Eliade, who is a brilliant historian of religions, has noted that this has happened many.
Not by contemporary standards. I feel like Camille, if he were here, would have far more to say about this. I think was Eliade from? Whatever the hell the Czech Republic was back then. Romanian. So it's kind of nearby, but I don't know.
Many, many times that God has vanished, disappeared. And one of his explanations for that is that a God that's too ineffable, so that's completely outside of the categories of time and space, let's say, and who doesn't make himself present as a being, who doesn't have a heavenly council, who has no hierarchy between the pinnacle and earth itself, tends to float off into space. It becomes so abstract that you can't have a relationship with it.
I mean, where did Jesus go after the resurrection?
And then he disappears.
In many ways, this is what Christianity provides with the New Testament and the figure of Jesus. That's why I think for a lot of Christians, the more important question for you and the question that they're interested in, and you're quite right that a lot of people are like, I want to get you on my team.
Yeah.
I have no dog in this fight. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
But I know that a lot of Christians are frustrated when they begin asking about Jesus, who's a much more physical entity. Right? It's a real human being. It's someone with flesh and blood. It's someone who's physically crucified by the Romans.
It's a very different question. It's a very different question.
And then is seen as a physical entity, at least according to the canonical tradition, by his disciples after he died.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks you, do you believe that happened? And when I've seen you ask about that question, you tend to still speak in terms of the psychological and the mythological. I think the frustration is that, as you've just said, these are
I
two
don't
different
mind frustrating
conversations, right?
Christians in that regard either, because the truth of the matter is, with regard to the gospel accounts, that the mythological and the historical are inextricably cross-contaminated.
Sure.
There's no pulling out the historical Jesus, right? That's a non-starter. And why that is, I don't know.
I'm going to skip around a bit. If there's a demand for it, I will come back to certain bits and review them. But I've not got much time left.
I see what you're saying, and I hope what I tried to do in making that video essay about your religious views, and I suppose I wasn't. The main thing I was trying to do was sort of offer an interpretation, trying to get to grips with it. And I hope that you feel as though at least I'm making an effort here to really try and get what you're thinking at. One problem is that, in the early church, there was a debate around the physicality of Jesus' resurrection.
Yes.
So the canonical tradition ends up stipulating that Jesus physically resurrects, and you must believe that, otherwise you're a heretic.
Yeah, and that's part of the Catholic particular emphasis on the divinity of the body, which has a real wisdom rather than a disembodied soul.
You also have like the Gnostic tradition, broadly speaking, the Gnostic tradition in early Christianity that's so popular that Valentinus nearly becomes the Bishop of Rome. He's nearly the Pope. And there's I talked about this the other day, and I should have looked it up. I can't remember which church father it was that was telling the church community, the early church community, when you go to a new place, don't ask to be taken to the Christian church, ask to be taken to the Catholic church, because otherwise you might end up in a Gnostic church. It was so popular.
Right.
And a lot of the Gnostic tradition says that the thing that's being gotten wrong is the idea that there was this literal resurrection.
Right.
No, the kingdom of God is here and now. The resurrection is inside of you, and you attain it through gnosis. I mean, the Gospel of Thomas, which is probably the most famous non-canonical gospel, and could have been written at the same time as like the Gospel of John. It's an early text. Doesn't even mention the resurrection. Doesn't mention a crucifixion. It's a list of sayings.
Yeah.
And the very form of that book, as one scholar whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately, has pointed out, of that collection shows that these people believed that the thing that's important is not what Jesus did, but what he said. The thing that's important is the knowledge. The thing that's important, right? And so this resurrection stuff sort of doesn't matter. Now the thing is, in that early church community,
only if you want to get back to Sophia, like me.
Somebody who said, well, this
because people frequently ask, why is the name of my channel Digital Gnosis? And it is because I have achieved Gnosis. And no, I when I was a Jordan Peterson Christian, before I became an evangelical Christian, I considered myself actually a Gnostic for a while, a Gnostic Christian. And that is why my channel is called Digital Gnosis. Yep. How times change. And I believed that through creating a YouTube channel, I was like, in modern culture, this will be a thing. Like I will use the digital to try and promote Gnosis. Kind of fucked, right? I think I was a crazy person. I now think I am a crazy person still, but just because I'm very mentally unwell.
This question of like the resurrection as a physical, historical event, that you're kind of missing the point. The thing that matters is like, the resurrection that takes place inside of every person.
Yeah.
It's
I take this with me while I'm going to create another coffee before I go.
Sort of sounds a little bit like the kind of approach that you would take. Now, if that's true, that would mean that in the early church, you'd have been condemned as a heretic. So when a modern Catholic says to you, Jordan Peterson, are you a Christian? What do you think about Catholicism? I think that the reason that they're interested is because if it's true what I'm saying, then they would have to say, oh, I suppose at least according to my understanding of Catholicism,
that's a form of Gnosticism.
I can't count you among my number. So I think that's probably why people are interested. And I wonder if you agree.
Well, what would you say? That would constitute a genuine form of inquiry.
Yeah, sure. And I wonder if you feel like you're. I mean, I don't know.
See, one of the things I really like about the bodily tradition of the resurrection is that see, what it does that's so remarkable is that it doesn't desacralize the body. And that's very, very important. I think the fundamental problem with Gnosticism is that it's very easy for it to become a doctrine that's contemptuous of the body and contemptuous of the material.
Yeah, I think that is actually correct, but it's also something that you can levy against traditional Christianity too. And I think that Platonism lends itself more to Gnostic Christianity, right? It's this contempt of the physical world, and the kind of ascetic tradition is kind of grounded in that train of thought, where the idea is that the higher things are the better things, and the things of this world are lowly. But I think that also, I do think that this strain makes itself into canonical Christianity also. Canonical when we create these divisions between Gnostic Christianity and the Christianity, creedal Christianity, that the creeds as defining themselves against groups like the Gnostics, and obviously other groups as well, Sabellians or whatever the fuck. I mean, it's not exactly like we've then achieved hegemony, right? There's an incredible amount of plurality even within that too, just as there's plurality within the Gnostic traditions as well. There's the Valentinian Gnostics and other sects. So, and even John's Gospel, I think, can be considered a sort of Gnostic text. The speculation about the Johannine community and what they believe that goes on. So I think that Christianity itself sort of doesn't escape this. I think when monks go to Mount Athos, right, Eastern Orthodox monks go to Mount Athos and starve themselves and repeat the Jesus prayer over and over again, I think that's a type of asceticism that's aimed at leaving behind the physical and going the higher things of the soul, and focusing on those because they're more godly, more holy. I think the same of what's Athanasius's book, not Against the World, the one the one where he talks about sex demons a lot, the life of Antony. And in the life of Antony, right, it's basically all about asceticism and how this Saint Anthony fellow sort of is harassed by sex demons everywhere he goes, and he's basically one horny guy. And he is kind of like this description of his torturous struggles with asceticism to escape the carnal trappings of this world. And so, and obviously, Athanasius is a foundational father grounded firmly in the canonical tradition, as is Antony, I'm pretty sure canonized within Catholicism. And so when one says within the Catholic tradition, this is what they believe about that, I think it's actually a far more complicated story than the picture that Peterson is painting.
Material world.
A great deal of the Gnostic tradition literally believes that the material world is created by an evil demiurge.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Well, exactly.
And Jesus comes to save us from
the
that.
insistence on the bodily resurrection is a medication against that,
Oh,
and it's an effective one.
I would really love to ask about Genesis. This might be a bit of a tangent, and tell me if it's uninteresting to you. But there's one Gnostic text called the Testimony of Truth that was discovered in the Nag Hammadi library, and this is buried probably around 300 AD, so it must be earlier than that. It's a fairly early text, and this text identifies the serpent in the Garden of Eden with Christ, and this is fascinating to me because when I read
as a leader to illumination.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
no,
Now,
there's a
when I
Gnostic
read
tradition that makes the serpent a higher god than the original god because he's the agent that calls to conscience.
Yeah, now of course the serpent. Yes, now the serpent is never identified as Satan or the devil except by Christian tradition. It's just the serpent. Now there's so much interesting about this. When I first read the Genesis, well,
even the classic Christians often regarded the fall as the, what would you say, fateful but heaven-sent error that made the incarnation of Christ both possible and necessary.
Sure.
Right, so there's it's very interesting because there's a gloss on that where even in traditional Christianity, the
it gives you
serpent
Christ.
becomes, that's right.
Yeah, it gives you Christ, and Jesus at one point compares himself to a serpent in the Gospel of John. You know, early.
Oh yes,
he'll raise himself up like Moses lifts up the serpent.
Insanely See, that's one of the passages. Actually, sorry, I don't want to derail you from your tangent, but that's one of the passages that I've concentrated a lot in this new book that I've just finished, We Who Wrestle with God, because that equation that Christ manages with his identification with the serpent in the desert. That is,
I think my prediction, though, is that Peterson will be sort of buying into will be influenced here by Peugeot. And so in how he's influenced by Peugeot here, he'll talk about, my guess, obviously book's not published yet, he'll say something like as above, so below, inversion, symbolism, something like that.
It is so stunningly brilliant that I cannot possibly imagine how anyone could have thought it up.
Oh, come on. You know, like human authors all the time create interesting symbolism and narrative that does this sort of thing. Think of in Harry Potter, right? When Snape turns out to be the good guy, and Harry, he thinks that Snape killed Dumbledore, right? I'm fucking forgetting my Harry Potter lore here. Snape killed Dumbledore. Harry saw that. And then when he goes through Dumbledore's memories, he realizes, and he thought Snape was the evil guy all the time. And actually Snape was, protecting Harry the whole time because of his love for his mum, who he couldn't be like. That was like crazy good, man. I put it on the same sort of level. I can't think of any other sort of ones like that off the top of my head, but people, is J.K. Rowling therefore? Well, I guess there's a weasel way out of this for Peterson. He can say, well, of course, J.K. Rowling is inspired by God because, this is what I mean when they say the stories are more real than real. However, she's clearly come up with that, right? And it's a human coming up with that. And so it's clearly possible for a human to come up with that. Now, you might say that there's a different way that I think is more religiously honest to get along with this idea, which is rather than to make it an inference to the best explanation that this was authored by divinity, is to say, I am so moved by this sort of fiction that it stirs within me an emotional sentiment which I can only express through religion. That's how I feel about a lot of things, and that's how I would express it. But I wouldn't try to dress it in this kind of rationalistic garb of it's the best the only way I can explain how, you know, you get a story like that is by religion being true, it being written by God or something.
It's to identify him with the source of the poison, that to gaze upon, what would you say, redeemed the Israelites in the desert. It's so, there's so much in that it's really a kind of miracle. That serpent on the stake, that's Asclepius. It's the same symbol.
Yeah, I think
so. That just in itself is something stunning.
there is something amazing that I think, of course.
1:45:52 I've been asked to go to, so I'll go to that, and then that will probably be the last one of this video. I will come back to it if there is request. So let's go.
He's saying at the pulpit are nonsense, and I said, "Go." But do you believe that Mary was a virgin when she gave birth? You know, it was funny. It was
right. Level of analysis problem.
At the same time, I sort of understood because
yeah.
And Dawkins says, you know, but surely when you go to church, you're having these feelings, and you must recognize that the things he's saying at the pulpit are nonsense. And Ian said that she chooses to believe it. She says that I no longer find it to be nonsense, because what she implied, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, I can't remember, but it was something like, look, I've been so captured by this meaning, that although I don't really understand what it means to say that, you know, Jesus was born of a virgin, I just choose to believe it.
Well,
now that's fine. But what she does, what I was going to say is, what she does is says that this to me is like a mystery. I don't really know exactly what it means, but I choose to believe that it's true. And I wonder if that's something like what you're doing here when you say that you believe. Well,
I can just tell you what my experience has been in this sort of thing. So I've spent a lot of time digging into the substructure of mythological accounts, right, in many different cultures.
Yeah.
Now,
when he says digging into the substructure, what does he mean? You know,
and my experience continually,
because what he doesn't mean, I don't think, is applying our best sociological tools of analysis to comparative religious studies or something.
Is the deeper I look, the more that's there.
Kutzinger, James Kutzinger, rest in peace, Eastern Orthodox Christian, died 2 years ago. He has a series on his YouTube channel on comparative religion, for example, where I think he does do that if people are interested. And the reason that I'm saying that in this triumphal tone is because, like, watch that and see the difference between the clarity and precision with which he educates on comparative religion, say, compared to Peterson, right?
And then I see things come together that make sense that I thought were disparate. And that there doesn't seem to be any limit to that. And so now when I see things that are disparate or even contradictory, I think, well, as you already pointed out, given the nature of the biblical library, there's room for some contradiction. But more than that, I think, well, that might be illogical or irrational, or I might just not understand it. And my experience has been that presumption turns out to be the case far more often than not. And so
it's so convenient, though, isn't it? You know, I'm either right or I don't understand it, and I'm right. I'm right, and if I'm wrong, I just don't understand it, but I'm still right. You know, there's basically what the point I'm getting at, to make this clearer for those who are frustrated. That's not what Jordan said. Is that if you adopt this heuristic, there is no way for you to find out that you're wrong anymore, right? Because whenever someone shows you a problem with your worldview, you just assume you've not fully understood it. So this is the heuristic, right? Someone shows you a problem for your worldview. Well, you're either right, you rebut them, or you tell them, that's interesting, I don't understand it yet. I will further entrench myself in this position and get a reply to you and continue to believe it. But it doesn't give you the tools to find out, I was actually wrong and I should change my mind about that, right? Because it's always going to be the case when you're in that position that you just didn't understand it.
You know, you can imagine that you can get the apprehension of a pattern, and you can think the pattern is compelling. And then there are details within the pattern that you don't know how to reconcile. But this is what Ian is doing in accordance with your account. It's like, well, I'm not willing to forego my view of the pattern because of some lack of concordance with details, especially given that I'm ignorant.
Yeah.
You know, like, well, I can only tell you what has been the pattern of my investigations. It's like, the more deeply I This is knocking and asking.
Mm.
The more I seek, the more.
I mean, this is literally a description of confirmation bias, right?
Is present.
And I guess.
Is this and is this just true for Christianity, Jordan? So imagine, Jordan, you were speaking to a Mormon, and the Mormon said, you know, imagine you were speaking to a member of the Heaven's Gate cult, and they said, the more I have sought out Heaven's Gate beliefs, the more it's made sense to me. Would you go, oh, fair enough, that's a good point, you're rationally justified in joining Heaven's Gate? Or would you say, it sounds to me like some kind of pernicious biases are at play here, and they're distorting your ability to objectively evaluate the evidence for these positions that you're adopting, right? And so it sounds like you're sort of distorting your desires, and your desire for it to be true is making you perhaps ignore certain types of evidence, or find evidence that you shouldn't be compelled by and fixate on it, things like that.
To conclude, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like so. Suppose I'm somebody, and broadly this is true. I think the gospel stories are fascinating and resonant. I like the idea of the resurrection of Christ. The way that it's criticized as this evil human sacrifice, I think, is misleading. I have all of that.
I'm glad. Just to point out, I'm glad that Alex says this now, because he obviously used to be someone who would characterize it that way. So.
Those parts.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm not a Christian.
Remember, here's a. So that's what he's saying now. What was it he said? Horrible things I've learned from my theology degree, something like that. Disgusting things I've learned from my.
The entirety of creation will be destroyed. Boso says he still wouldn't look. In the presence of God, there's no way Boso could contradict God's command.
What's he say? Anyway, the point is,
says whilst directly
he makes these sort of points in this video. So he's moved on from that, and I'm happy.
And some of
Digging into the substructure of mythological accounts, right? In many.
I think I'm going to have to call it around here, guys. So I'll have a quick look through the comments. The comment sign. How to insert your nosedive. Yeah. How isn't anyone complimenting this man's beautiful choice of suit? Well, everyone at the Heaven's Gate cut is dead. Essay on Eliada's Fascism by Norman Minea, Felix Culper in On Clowns, the Dictator and the Artist. Also a debate in pages of, I thought I said LARP, but LARB, I don't know what that is. Filippo, yeah, thanks for the recommendation. Thank you for the James Kutzinger recommendation. I'd love to learn about the underlying psychology between religions, not from... Yeah, so I'll show you. He's got... this is the... This is the thingy. And he died of cancer, I think, 2 years ago. But he was an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And I'm very sympathetic to his views. So these series on comparative religion were really good. And I highly recommend them to people who are interested in comparative religion. Buen video. Muchas gracias, Zloman. Yo quiero viajar a Hun Hill para una fiesta con mi amigo Harry. Es Harry cumpleaños. Feliz cumpleaños. Noble Aristotelian says, nice commentary. Thank you very much. I think you nailed it, putting out the unfalsifiable nature of JP explanations. ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? Sí, 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 muy bien. Tú necesito sexo. Ay, chica, yo necesito sexo. This is, of course, all I know. Oh, the James Kutzinger link. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, if people want more, so please obviously like this if you benefited from it and promote it around to get more people kind of engage it. Like I think I've got some pretty decent analyses of Peterson, so I'd like more people to kind of see them and engage them. I'd love to have a conversation with Peterson at some point, or Alex if he's around. I'm in London, he's in London. No reason we can't hook it up. What else? If there's obviously this is going to end. If there's more in that video that people want me to watch, please just comment and say, like, maybe put specific timestamps of the video or roughly the topic or something, and I'll come back and do it tomorrow or something like that. Because otherwise, I've got some different stuff going on my channel the rest of the week, because I'm interviewing Anya, who is an she's an ex-Muslim who became an atheist, and then she became a Sam Harris fan, and then she kind of deconstructed from, and after interviewing Sam Harris, she deconstructed from his points of views and now views them as very harmful, in a way that I do, though she's probably a little bit more extreme than me. And then hopefully Camille and I are going to be doing a stream too, talking about historical evidences for Christianity. And then Stan Patton, Christian Wittgensteinian, who I'm very sympathetic to and I think has some great observations about errors that people make in philosophy. We're going to have a conversation about that and maybe talk about some more digestible, palatable versions of Christianity that there may be out there. So, yeah, should be good over the next week or so. But yeah, otherwise, going to Herne Hill for my friend's birthday. If you're around Herne Hill, get on down, Gatecrash. Or if you are a Jordan Peterson fan who's very angry, come and fight me. I will kill you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.